Welcome to The Author Show, where we feature new authors and books, from fiction to self-help and everything in between. You'll find it all at theauthorshow.com. That's theauthorshow.com. And now let the show begin.
Hello and welcome back to the show. This is your host, Don McCauley. Today we're welcoming the program author Marvin Ross, and he is the author of Anti-Psychiatry and the UN Assault on the Mentally Ill. Before I bring in today's guest, a quick reminder that selected interviews are available on our iPhone app, which can be downloaded in the App Store, as well as on TV in the Roku channel and Amazon Fire TV. Our app name on all platforms is simply The Author Show. Marvin, how are you?
I'm well, thank you.
Well, tell us a little bit about yourself, please.
Okay, I am a medical writer and publisher specializing in books on serious mental illness. I've been a medical writer for a number of years, but back in 2008, I released my first book on mental illness, on schizophrenia, and that did reasonably well with some very good reviews. And I then started getting people with other interesting perspectives on serious mental illness contact me with books. So I have published about 12 of them so far, and almost all of them have done, I would say, extremely well, with some very good reviews and commendations from various people worldwide.
So tell us about this book.
This book is sort of a work of love, because what I wanted to do was put together all of the misconceptions that exist about serious mental illness, and particularly schizophrenia, and using the evidence that exists, refute them. And unfortunately, the United Nations has bought into this concept that serious mental illness really doesn't exist or isn't as serious as people think it is, and have recommended a number of policies which would result in much worse outcomes than we have today.
Now, who did you write your book for specifically? Who's your target audience?
Well, there are a number of targets. First and foremost are the mothers. The mothers of those with serious mental illness tend to do the bulk of the work and have the most responsibility. Unfortunately for them, they take things very seriously, which is fortunate for their kids. But they need a great deal of support, because they run into a lot of stigma, and they run into a lot of these ideas of, geez, if your kid just pulled his boots up, or whatever that expression is, he'd be fine, or, maybe your mothering was bad. And what I've done in this book is to refute that. But also, I think the book would be very good for people either in the helping fields like social work and nursing, or going into those fields, so that they too can get a perspective of what the reality is. And the reality is that these are no-fault illnesses. Nobody caused them. They happen like any other disease, and they have to be treated using the best evidence-based methods that we have available. So those are the two key targets for this book.
So if you had to choose, could you say there's a central message in the book?
Yeah, it is a central message in the book. What I have done is I've looked at all of the negative views that exist on psychiatry and on the treatment of the mentally ill, like medication makes people worse, which is not the case. Medication is the backbone of treatment, or the mothers have caused the problem, or trauma in childhood is one reason why people experience these issues later in life, or poverty, or racism. And these are all negatives, but they don't impact the cause of mental illness. The causes are not that well understood, but certainly a large part of it is genetics. people might want to talk about, well, poor people suffer more. Yes, but I know a lot of very wealthy people who have kids who develop serious mental illness. As I said before, it's a no-fault illness that has the same incidence worldwide.
So if you could compare your book with any book out there we might already be familiar with, which book would it be and why?
Well, I don't want to sound pretentious by suggesting I'm trying to be like the book Understanding Schizophrenia by Dr. E. Fuller Torrey, but his book, it's been in numerous editions throughout the years. It's considered the Bible of understanding this illness. What I have attempted to do is to be as thorough and honest as he has been in his description of what this disease is and how it can best be treated.
And what do you mean by anti-psychiatry, and why do you say the UN is assaulting the mentally ill?
Well, anti-psychiatry refers to that group of people who consider psychiatry to be an absolutely horrific branch of medicine. In fact, every year the American Psychiatric Association has their annual convention, and it's always picketed by people who oppose psychiatry. And this is a group of people who say that mental illness doesn't really exist. It's an attempt by the pharmaceutical industry and psychiatrists to make money by oppressing people who have problems of daily living. Now, unfortunately, the United Nations, in their Convention on the Rights of the Disabled, which is a very worthy endeavor, have bought into this belief, and they insist that countries sign their declaration, which calls for banning many of the strategies that work to help the mentally ill. So unfortunately, these are very regressive ideas which will help prolong the suffering of the mentally ill and prevent them from getting the appropriate treatment that they need.
Now, you advocate for involuntary treatment under certain conditions, but isn't that a violation of the rights of the individual?
Well, you could say that, but let me look first at Alzheimer's disease and dementia. Now, that may sound like a strange comparison, but the elderly with dementia and Alzheimer's, because of their disease, have difficulties of daily living, of even existing. And what we do with people suffering from these conditions is we put them into care situations where they're properly looked after. I happen to be power of attorney for somebody with Alzheimer's, and the poor guy, despite a PhD, doesn't know what day it is, cannot function on his own, and is in a secure care facility. Now, originally, when neurologists were discovering these things, or at least describing them, schizophrenia, for example, was called dementia praecox because it was believed that it was an early onset of dementia. The markers are somewhat similar. But rather than looking after the people who suffer from these conditions or this condition in youth, we ignore them. They wind up homeless, in jail, on the streets, and they have a completely miserable life. So the solution in many cases, because both groups of people, the Alzheimer's patients and those with schizophrenia, because of the nature of their disease, don't even know that they're ill.
So why do you oppose the UN suggestion that the insanity plea for criminal offenses not be abolished?
Man has always made allowances for people who are mentally ill, who have committed offenses, to be dealt with other than through the penal system. Going back to the era before 1066, believe it or not, if you committed murder, you had to pay the family of the person you murdered in compensation. If you were mentally ill, your family did that for you. And then about 1800, the British Parliament passed the Criminal Lunatics Act, which acquitted people who committed offenses while insane. And we've progressed from there. Now, in many jurisdictions, it's not criminally responsible. You know, you've committed an act which a sane person would not commit. So the humane solution to that is to put the person in hospital and treat their illness. And in the vast majority of cases, that is in fact successful, and the recidivism is quite minimal. It's totally cruel and inhumane to, for example, execute somebody for committing an offense of, say, murder while their mind is completely destroyed by the illness.
Now, do you see a connection between anti-psychiatry and the present anti-vax movement?
Yeah, very definitely. Anti-psychiatry is built on an anti-science basis, and the anti-vax movement, particularly with respect to COVID, is also based on a disbelief in the germ theory and the validity of vaccinations, which historically have rid the world of many of the scourges that we previously suffered from. You know, polio no longer exists because we vaccinate against polio. And if you look at the people now who are becoming ill with COVID, they tend to be the unvaccinated. So in both instances, it's a very anti-science movement.
So other than selling the book, of course, is there anything else you hope to accomplish with it?
Yeah, I really hope to support family caregivers in whatever small way I can in this book. The family caregivers, for those with mental illness, don't get the recognition and support that those with other ailments like cancer get. And they really need all the help they can get, and I hope in some small way I can contribute to this.
So in your opinion, who should buy your book?
Families, as I said earlier, particularly families with people with serious mental illness in the family, policy and healthcare planners, and particularly politicians who influence health law.
Do you have a website?
Yes, it is bridgeross.com, as in Bridge Ross Communications.
Well, this has been just great. Our guest today has been Marvin Ross, and he is the author of Anti-Psychiatry and the UN Assault on the Mentally Ill. Marvin, thanks very much for being with us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. My pleasure.
This is Don McCauley, wrapping up another edition of The Author Show. Go out there, buy the book today, and please share this interview with your friends so that they too have the opportunity to discover our guests and their work. The Author Show can be accessed at any time at theauthorshow.com. Selected interviews can also be found on major platforms like Amazon Fire TV, the Roku channel, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Amazon Music, and many more. And whether you're an author who would like to be featured or a reader in search of new books to read, The Author Show is a great place to start. Check us daily as we continue to introduce wonderful authors of very interesting books on The Author Show.
Thanks for listening to The Author Show. Find out more about authors and their work at theauthorshow.com. Theauthorshow.com. Tune in next time to another great author on The Author Show.